Hello, hello. Welcome to Pushing Cardboard. I'm Grant Lindenberg, your pusher. This is episode 13, Kai Jensen and GMT Weekend at the Warehouse. This will be a little different episode than usual, as I won't be diving into a game this time. Rather, the bulk of the episode will be a recap of my recent trip to Hanford and the GMT West Weekend at the Warehouse event, followed by the first of the interviews I conducted there. I spoke with Kai Jensen, new full-time employee at GMT, and the wife of recently deceased and much-loved designer Chad Jensen. It's definitely worth sticking around for that, as Kai was a clear and eloquent speaker with a lot to say about her husband's designs, both old and new, and what we might be able to expect down the line. There's been a large uptick in traffic on the website, thanks to everyone who has stopped by, and especially to those who left a comment and or registered for the website. Seeing the increase in traffic has given me the push to come up with more ideas for pieces to put on the web that might not be suited to the podcast. So hopefully I'll be able to get a few of those out as we roll along here. News and what I've been playing. Well, news first. Apart from my trip to California, the big news lately has been all about awards. No sooner did Matt from the History on the Table podcast announce a brand new set of historical gaming awards, and then bam, Gary from Ardwolf's Lair YouTube channel announced that he'd been named the new director of the Charles S. Roberts Awards, and that they had constituted a new board and were set to make a push to make the Charlies relevant again. Can't help but think that the announcement by Matt forced the Charlies to hurry up a bit and make their announcement sooner than they intended. But in any case, we now look to have two competing sets of awards. I doubt we need two sets, but if this is what it took to get the Charlies out of the ditch, it can only be a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And it'll be interesting to compare the two as they mature. And by the way, be sure to check out the History on the Table podcast. It's by a couple of guys who are a whole lot newer to the hobby than me, and they bring a fresh new perspective, especially talking about older games. And if YouTube is your thing, you probably already know about Ardwolf's Lair, but if not, I'll put links to both in the notes. As for what's on the table, I'll be brief about that, about what's on the PBEM table again this time, as I'll have plenty to describe in the GMT West segment. Wendell and I did finish our Barbarossa scenario of absolute war, with his Germans managing to hold on to Moscow for the victory. We're moving on to the Case Blue scenario to continue with the system, and I'll be the Soviets again. It's interesting to look at the setup for Case Blue, which pretty much starts on the turn after the Barbarossa scenario ends, and you go, oh yeah, that's those are the hexes I needed to hold on to but didn't. Anyway, it's going to be fun to continue to explore that series. I've been playing Rommel in the Desert on the Rally the Troops website. This version is still in alpha testing, but so far so good. It looks great, and we haven't found any glitches in play yet. And it allows for asynchronous play or live play, because your game updates for both of you as you make your moves. So you can play in real time, or the game will be there for the other person to make their move whenever. Really, I mean, that's one of my favorite games despite my terrible record at it. So I'm really happy to be playing it again. I'll have more updates next time on Last 100 Yards, Stonewall Sword, all the Commands and Colors games. They're all still going strong, among a few others. My Nemesis game is still going, and a couple others. So, before I forget, I should also say one more update for those keeping track at home. I'm still waiting on my shelves from IKEA. It's a disaster. Games everywhere, stacked haphazardly all over the basement here. At some point, I've begun to believe it's not really a supply chain issue. It's just IKEA wants to piss me off. So mission accomplished there, IKEA. Oh well, I'll let you know if and when I ever get the shelves that I've been looking for. In terms of new games to the collection, happily, the only thing that came in since the last time we spoke was the new mission pack for Last 100 Yards. I haven't really opened it and had a look yet, but I'm sure it's great. I say it's happily that nothing new arrived because when I was down in Hanford at the GMT weekend, they put on a great sale for participants there. And so I took advantage of that and plus got a couple more non-GMT games while I was down there as well. So, well, I'll get to that as we talk about the GMT weekend at the warehouse next. So I decided on GMT's weekend at the warehouse as my first big road trip to a convention. Partly because I knew that it wasn't a huge convention, like going to WBC or even down to Consim World or something like that. And I knew it also wasn't going to be hyper competitive, and so I was looking forward to this, sort of a more relaxed feeling, and that's entirely what I got. But yeah, it was a long drive down. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and that's about 2,300 kilometers from Hanford, California. So it was 24 hours total driving time both ways, which was, I like to drive, all fine with me. And I got to drive through British Columbia, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California. So the drive itself was great. Actually, it was beautiful, and met a few nice people in coffee shops along the way. I got down there and got my hotel and all that, and then on Thursday morning, got up bright and early, made my way over to the warehouse. It was an interesting arrival to get at the warehouse because there it's in a sort of an industrial area where you might think well, not really. I mean, there's a high school across the street down the way, I guess, but they're in a lot with a few other sort of warehousey type places, and the only signage on GMT is on their door, which they had propped open to welcome people, but it made it like I don't know which one of these businesses is GMT because all the businesses here kind of have the same address. Anyway, I finally found out which one it was, went in, and it was just like you might think, friendly people welcoming you there. It's a nice old red brick warehouse, plenty of character, tables set up everywhere, and the ladies in the office who check you in, they were great. I had brought a big bag full of games, found myself a table in one of the rooms, and set up and got ready for to wait for my first partner. I'd arranged my first game ahead of time, so had a look around, saw some cool things. There was like some guys playing Panzer Leader, which was lovely to see some old school games there. On the weekend, I also saw somebody playing. Breakout Normandy. So yeah, it was nice to see a couple of old Avalon Hill titles being played. Anyway, had a look around, met a couple people, and then Will Bauer, my first partner, showed up, and we played the 1862 scenario of GMT's The U.S. Civil War by Mark Simonich. Will hadn't played it before. He was either picking it up at the tournament or he just ordered it. I'm not sure which, but he hadn't played it before, so it was an introductory scenario for him and kind of a relearning scenario for me. But it was great fun to finally meet Will. We've been playing each other online for the better part of a year here, playing a lot of Blind Swords together. We're on our third scenario of Blind Swords games. So in addition to meeting a great guy like Will and meeting face to face with someone you've only played with online, it was kind of fun for the two of us to play a grand strategic game on the American Civil War, because we'd been playing all these battle games. No surprise that my side hung on for the win. I was playing the South, but that was only due to me having slightly more knowledge of the rules and teaching Will, and I think he had a good time. I'm sure he is, because last I talked to him, he said he'd set up a PBM game with somebody to play more of the U.S. Civil War. So that was game one. Then I ran into Trevor Bender, the designer of Curse the Tigers Are Burning, that came out in C3I magazine a few issues ago, 2 or 3 issues ago, and I'd really loved that game. And he was there at the convention to demo his new game in that system, which is on North Africa, but using basically the same system. If you've played that game before, I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, so you probably know that it has that interesting postures mechanic where depending on what posture you're in, allows you to either do more or receive more. I can't wait to get the next game in the series, which he had a really good looking prototype out for people to play with at the convention, and apparently it's going to be in the next C3I magazine, which, if everything goes well, will be out before Christmas or shortly thereafter. So good interview with him, which you'll get to hear later on down the road, either next episode or the one after that. And then I played. I think it was that night. Then I played a little. I met Charles Overbeck, another newbie to the tournament or to the convention, and he had said, well, maybe it was the next night. At some point, I don't know. I missed the days up. But anyway, we played a little bit of Washington's War because it was a game he'd always wanted to learn, and I happened to have it with me. So we played 2 or 3 turns of that, and had a good time. He liked the system enough that he put in his order for the P500 for that, and we agreed to look for each other farther down the convention and maybe get in a full play of something. The next morning, I was due to play Harold Buchanan, but I got there a little early before our time, so I had another look around the next morning. I saw Harold giving a demo of his game Flashpoint South China Sea. I saw John Butterfield demoing a game called Downfall, which was a design of the late Chad Jensen. John is it was mostly complete, but it did need still needed a couple of serious parts to be figured out, and so Kai Jensen gave the game to John Butterfield, who apparently was a good friend of Chad Jensen's, to finish, and looks like John's got it finished. He had a prototype copy at the convention that players were dropping in and out of all the time, and it looks really good. It's a really interesting setup. It's one of those World War II games where one player is the Soviets plus the Germans in the West, and the other player is the other player is the Western Allies, and then the Germans in the East. So the game is really between the Soviets and the West, and it's kind of like a race to Berlin, or a race to carve up what the future of Europe's going to look like after the Germans are totally defeated. Anyway, lots of buzz about that game, and it was interesting and lovely to see John Butterfield demoing it and speaking about it. Talk about a giant in the industry, and just a lovely man. Also being demoed was the latest iteration of Fighting Formations. The game by Chad Jensen, that was the first formation that came out a few years ago, was the Großdeutschland division, and then there was a small expansion, the Kharkov game, with some smaller scenarios, and but now there's going to be the 29th Infantry Division introducing the U.S. to the game, and Kai was demoing that, and she had a beautiful prototype as well. That it would be hard to say it didn't look like the actual game is going to look. Anyway, that's I think that might even be on the P500 list. If not, it will be shortly. And Kai will talk about that in the interview coming on. But that was great to look at. I really like that system, and I'm glad it's moving forward as well. So then I finally got to sit down with Harold Buchanan. Harold does a lot in the hobby. He's got his own podcast, Harold on Games. I think he runs the San Diego HistCon, the San Diego Historical Convention, and him and his team have also recently put together an online e-zine. I think it's called Conflicts of Interest. If you haven't seen it yet, look for it online. It's a great new online only magazine. If you've seen Punched, the UK online e-zine, very similar. Both of them look great. I recommend them both. Anyway, it was lovely to meet Harold in person after having listened to his podcast for so long. And we had set up, we'd prearranged to have a game of Clash of Giants Gettysburg from GMT by Ted Racer. Neither of us had played it before, so I took south, he took north. We'd both kind of boned up on the rules beforehand, and we just gave it a go. We really enjoyed the system. I think Harold liked it as much as I did. It's a chit pull system. It's got a really interesting combat mechanic. Unlike most things I think I've seen before, it really made me wonder why the Clash of Giants system died after only 3 games or 3 boxes. I'd really like to see other ACW battles played with this system. So I don't know. Maybe with Harold talking about it on his podcast at some point, or maybe you can get Ted Racer to get back on it. Who knows? Anyway, it was we had a great time. We went out for lunch in the middle. Had a great lunch and a good yak about the industry and whatnot, and then came back. And after day 2, my Confederates surrendered. There was no point pushing on to day 3 of Gettysburg because I just didn't have enough gas left in the tank. So, but that was really fun. Had a great time with Harold, and we really both enjoyed the game. After that, I kicked around a bit more, saw a few more things, and then I interviewed Steve Carey. He's the designer of the recent Blind Swords game from Revolution Games, A Greater Victory. And that'll be another interview on the podcast down the line. He's a really interesting guy. He's like an associate editor at C3I magazine. He's designed this game, and I think he's got another game coming up for the Blind Sword system for Revolution. I think his you'll hear in the podcast when it appears. But his new game is going to be on South Mountain. South Mountain. I think it's going to be on Shiloh. That's right, South Mountain. What he's already designed on. His new game is on, I think, the first day of Shiloh. So you can look forward to that if you're a Blind Swords fan, and look forward to that interview as well with Steve Carey, a really gregarious guy, passionate about the hobby and both playing and designing games. Yeah, so that was Friday. I guess later on Friday, that's when I finally played Washington's War and met up with Charles and played Washington War, and that was that. Then Saturday morning, they have a tradition there at the Weekend at the Warehouse where it starts with a speech from GMT head Jeans Billingsley, along with his introduction of any designers and developers who are in the room, and them giving short updates on what they're working on. A couple that, one that caught my ear was, of course, the one from about Downfall that John Butterfield was working on. But another one that caught my ear was Jerry White, the designer of Atlantic Chase, among other games, said that he was working on something having to do with the beginnings of submarines. A submarine game set in the American Civil War, I think, is what that kind of parses out to. And I can only guess if, he's a really innovative designer. If you've played or looked at Atlantic Chase, you know that he's come up with something for that game that just totally changed the way World War II naval warfare worked. So it'll be interesting to see if he's got anything as bold and innovative on his mind for the early days of submarines. We can all look forward to that. This was also the place in the weekend where it was announced that we could shop the warehouse and take 50% off the retail price. So, luckily I've already got a large closet of GMT games, but with that discount and no shipping, I figured I had to pick up a few games that either I'd been on the fence about or just hadn't got around to buying yet. So I got 5 new GMT games. I got Conquest and Consequence. That's the follow-up game from Craig Besink, the follow-up to Triumph and Tragedy. Again, it's a 3-person game, 3-player game. This one, I think the players are probably China, Japan, and the Americans, although they might be China, Japan, and Russia. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know. I just know I really like Triumph and Tragedy. I like the sandboxy nature of it, and the reviews of this had been really good. So that was the first one. Then I got No Retreat, Poland and France and Poland. I hadn't got that version or that title in the No Retreat line. I think it's the only one that I didn't have, and I'm always interested in seeing different designers' take on the fall of France. It's a tricky thing to design to make the victory conditions interesting, to make the gameplay interesting, to see what their take on the history is, and I really like Carl Paradis, so it was great to finally pick that up. I got the Fighting Formations Kharkov expansion because I had never picked that up. I'd played one of the scenarios online, but hadn't picked up the expansion, and I knew I always wanted it. I got the base game for Panzer. I think this is a game that I was only going to buy at 50% off because I'm not sure if it's going to turn out to be my thing or not. I don't know if that detailed a look at tank-on-tank battle is going to turn out to be the thing for me, or I'm not sure. I mean, one of my first war games was Tobruk, and I loved it, so maybe this is going to rekindle that same feeling, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm happy to have it, and if it turns out I like it, then there's a whole lot more Panzer available for me to buy down the line. And then finally, I got Into the Woods, the GBACW game. I don't have any of the GMT GBACW games. I think those games originally came out in the old S&T magazine. Maybe I wasn't a big S&T subscriber, but I do have a couple of those, and I think I might have one or two. I might have even played one of those back in the way old 1980s days. So it'll be interesting to have a look through that box and see what the system looks like now with new pretty counters and modern graphics packages to put it through its paces. I should also mention that while I was at GMT, I managed to buy a secondhand copy, but not used at all, not punched. So a mint copy of Flying Pig's A Most Fearful Sacrifice it's the new version of the blind sword system. I think it's called the Black Swan system or something like that, because this is Gettysburg yet again, but so the game is I think at a higher scale than the regular blind swords games are. And so I think Herman Luttman has tweaked the system a little bit for the different scale. I'm not sure. I know that it's not exactly a blind swords game, that it's slightly different. But anyway, I was as Flying Pig doesn't ship to Canada, I'd been trying to get a hold of that game, hadn't been able to get it. Managed to buy a secondhand copy and bring it on home with me. And then as well, because I was down there and ran into the guys Roger and Rich and Steve from Revolution Games as they were doing demos of Death of an Army, their EAP game. They also had copies of Steve Carey's new Blind Swords game, A Greater Victory. So I got a copy of that while I was down there as well. So yeah, that's 7 new games. That's a lot of new games for me to work through in the next while. It's going to take a while. Anyway, so once all that was out of the way, I was invited to play in a great 8-person game of Tank Duel. It was hosted by the designer Mike Berticelli, and it's 4 on each side. We were the Soviets. I had Candace Harris from the Board Game Geek. You've probably seen her videos or seen her on The Geek if you're a Geek user, with her colorful cornrowed hair, and she was one of the Soviets with me, and we blew up them Germans real good. It was a fun game. I've owned that game for a bit and had only sort of looked through it and played with the bot rules a little bit, but I gotta say it was way more fun as a multiplayer game than as a 2-player or a 1-player game. This would be a game I'd keep in my bag for. I think you could probably play a scenario in an hour. It can almost be a filler game, and it's a lot of fun because, of course, there's plenty of trash talking between the sides. After that, I ran into Charles again, and we decided to try Brief Border Wars from Compass Games, which I had with me. Neither of us had played it before. I'd played it solo a little bit when it first came out, but it's only 4 pages of rules, and then there's 4 games in that box. We chose the China versus Vietnam 1979 game, and so 4 pages of series rules, and then 4 pages of rules for each specific game. So it was a quick read, and we dove right in. It was really fun. We probably knocked it out in 90 minutes, including reading the rules and setting up. So it was fun to learn and play, and made me want to play it again, which, as it turns out, I did down the line. But before I got to that, I did my interview with Kai Jensen, which you'll hear shortly. She's now working full-time at GMT, assisting Tony Curtis on production. But she also seems to be doing some like rules editing and learning about layout and stuff like that. So, you'll hear more about it in the interview a little bit later on. I also had a great chat with David Siskin, another player that that was new to me at the event that I met there, and we were playing together in Tank Duel, and then just had a good yak, and I watched him. He's got a bunch of friends that he plays Barba Star Rossa with. It's kind of this strange deck building game that's a mashup of anime art and Eastfront in the form of this deck building card driven game, with sort of outrageous anime art and dueling tanks. Anyway, they say they play it every Saturday at the Weekend at the Warehouse events. And even though there's another version of the game that has more standard art instead of the anime art, they say they like to continue to play with the anime art because they like the startled looks of the onlookers and the grumbles from the old grognards. Anyway, David was a great guy. We had a lovely chat about wargaming and as a hobby, and sort of the life of old wargamers. Another great guy I met at the warehouse for sure. Sunday morning, I played someone I had met online who'd given me a ton of tips. Joshua, who's a regular attendee of Weekend at the Warehouse, and also part of David Siskin's gang, who plays the Barbarossa game. We had hoped to meet up and be able to play something at some point during the weekend, and Sunday morning was our last chance, as we were both leaving midday. So we tried another game from Brief Border Wars. This time it was the Lebanon scenario. And again 4 pages of rules for David to look at, and then another 4 pages of scenario-specific rules. Away we away we went, and we knocked it out in under 90 minutes again. And it was a really engrossing game. This one also ended in a draw, just as the other ones did, but it was a close run thing. I almost had him beat, I think, by just a single point, and then but I just couldn't quite get enough units back onto the board, and he had a couple of good rolls with reactivating a couple units right at the end, and managed to pull the victory points down enough so that we were in the draw range. But it was a great game, made us both want to play the game some more. And another guy who says that the event feels like a big family convention to him, or a family reunion to him, and he looks forward to it every year. It was fun to play with him. So that was it for me in the tournament, or me in the games at the tournament. There were also there. I should also mention that I saw some guys playing the Napoleonic Wars, where they had a completely pimped out version where they were using wood block pieces with painted minis glued to the top of the wood blocks. It was quite a sight. Everybody who saw it commented on it, I'm sure. There was also a weekend-long Down in Flames tournament going on that players kept coming in and out of. It was kind of a 2-on-2 tournament, and apparently that happens every weekend in the warehouse. So if you're a Down in Flames player, you're going to want to check that out sometime. I think the game I saw played the most was surely Space Corp from GMT. A lot of people playing that. Even some folks who bought it on Saturday opened it and started playing it. So that was that. And the other game that I saw many tables playing was Bayonets and Tomahawks. And that's a year older, but it seemed to be a real big favorite. Lots of people playing it, and lots of people playing it for the first time. There was lots of people learning it. So. Those were the two big ones. Saw a fair number of Commands and Colors games being played, Samurai being played the most, but also a fair number of medieval, Commands and Colors medieval games. So that was it. I headed out around noon or so, and headed back north up Highway I-5 or 99, whatever it was, and made my way back to Canada. That took another 24 hours. But I was glad I went, and if there's any chance I can ever make that trip again, I'll do it in a heartbeat. Okay, now instead of a dive into a game, here's my interview with Kai Jensen. We did this interview in the back of the warehouse amongst the stacks of the GMT games on all those shelves. Very picturesque setting for a war game interview, despite the fact that it's being done in a warehouse. But here it is. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, welcome back to Pushing Cardboard. I'm here at the GMT weekend at the warehouse with Kai Jensen. Welcome, Kai.
Thank you.
Kai is you're now working full time for GMT.
I am. Yes.
And what's your sort of official title, or what's your job description?
I am a trainee under Tony Curtis,
right,
who is the production manager.
Right.
So
right.
I'm learning the production and print end of things.
Right. So okay, but at the same time, you have I got this right? You do some rules editing as well.
I do. I do rules writing. I do editing. I do proofing. I'm also involved now in layout.
Fantastic.
And learning some stuff on graphics, because Chad used to do all of his own graphics, counter art layouts and
right.
maps.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to do all that with him. And so his games that I'm continuing, I'm doing the artwork for.
Right. So you're learning a lot about Illustrator and
InDesign
InDesign and all
yes.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
And did I read that you'd worked on the Mark Herman's reprint or republish of
Pacific War.
Pacific War. You worked on that.
I did.
Yes. I think everybody who'd had the first version was really grateful for that.
Yeah, and Hitler's Reich.
Hitler's
Same thing.
Reich.
I did
Yes,
the new
that-
rule book for that.
Yes, because that game was sort of like, it was kind of a hit, but people were like, oh, this rule book is confounding, and
Yes.
it turned people
It just
off
needed
a
to
little
get
bit.
reorganized.
Yeah, it was just just needed to change the way the whole thing was presented. It wasn't
Yeah.
a problem of rules; it was a problem of presentation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was well written, just in the wrong order.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds kind of like parts of my life, but that's all right. So you're interning on the production side of things, but you're still also on the creative side of things too, with the editing and the artwork and all that.
And
yeah.
I'm still, for Chad's games that were designed, I'm still doing the development portion of those things that he had left unfinished.
Right. So the first one, the one that you were demoing here at the conference, is the latest iteration of the Fighting Formations series. It comes to the West Front now with the 29th Division, right? Mm-hmm. And that was mostly done when Chad passed away, and
Better than 90%.
Oh, that's so
95, 98. We were somewhere in there.
So you handled all the last 10 yards you did.
Yeah,
on
John
your own.
Foley, who lives on the East Coast.
Okay.
Dear friend of ours. He and Chad and I were working on that just before Chad fell ill, and so the whole thing went on hold.
Right.
And then it's just taken me this long. It's been, 3 years now, next month, to get my head back in the game.
Right,
And
right.
get back into being able to work on the unfinished stuff.
Right.
So I contacted John, and he is back in with me to get this one finished up. And then he and I are going to continue the series forward.
Did you work with your husband a lot when he was still alive? Were you involved in helping him with his designs or proofing or layout or
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah, I was his developer.
Right.
There were a couple of games where we brought in, like I said, John Foley. I want to say like Brian Collars did some work with us. A couple of other guys would come in around the edges of stuff, but Chad did the design. I did his primary development. I ran the majority of his play tests for those projects that I was in on.
And so you were sort of like his developer. He did his own artwork as well. So
Yes.
it was, you guys in many ways were like a two-person shop.
Yeah, well, I mean, when he first started out, we thankfully had Mark Simonich's team doing some of the graphics for like Combat Commander.
Right.
So all the little people, because neither he and I could do
The little
that
people.
level of
Yeah.
and it did look human, and
Yeah.
poor Chad couldn't draw a stick figure without making it look injured, and so we had access to the art department for that to get him started. But he was doing his own maps. He laid out his own counters, and then we would just go get artwork from them for the people or the tanks or whatever had to
Right.
go on there for the fine detail.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
he
yeah.
did his own basic layout
Right.
for everything.
Yeah.
And he was very specific. He wanted certain things in certain places, certain colors, and he was very particular. So he did his own.
I mean, Mark Simonich does that with his games. Over at Legion, Kim Kanger does that with his games.
Yeah. It's a thing.
It's a thing, and it's a great thing. You can really tell when you're looking at a game from a designer's mind, where they've not just designed the game, but designed
Controlled all the elements.
all the elements.
Absolutely. Yep.
You don't feel like their design was compromised. You're getting what they
Yes.
imagined and
Yeah.
what they wanted.
Yeah, and the funny thing I learned just this year was, and I had thought that Chad and Mark Simonich were like totally in lockstep with each other in terms of the artwork
Right.
and things. And when Mark was working on Downfall with John Butterfield and I, he took over finishing out the map. Chad had a very certain aesthetic, a certain color palette
Yep.
that set a tone for the game. And it's very somber and it's very muted tones.
Yeah, I
and stuff.
love
and
his
it was
palette, yeah.
very dark ocean color. It's a deep blue-gray.
Yeah.
And I found out that Mark's preference for colors does not include that color.
Right.
And he's like, if I'm working on this, that's not staying. And my first instinct was to dig my heels in and go, like, it's Chad's game, it was his vision and stuff. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I want this game to get out. I need to shut my mouth and say, yes, Mark, and see what he comes back with. And he first put out a blue that I was like, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. It's too bright for what the game content, the tone is supposed to be.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try this a different way and just ask him, how dark are you willing to go? And let's head that direction and stuff. So now we've got a nice compromise.
Right.
It's not exactly the map that I have at home because I've got Chad's map still.
Yeah.
in my game room, but it's deep enough that it's not Robin's Egg Blue,
And
and it doesn't wreck the tone.
That's collaboration, right?
And
It's
that's working with, and I was thinking to myself, this guy's been doing games for how long, and I'm some Johnny come lately come around just like I'm the wife of the guy, change things. No, I don't have that purview,
Right.
or I shouldn't feel like I do.
Yeah.
So I was like, very wisely, my brain caught up before my mouth shot off, and was like, just come at this from a different angle.
That game. Well, let's talk about that game for a little minute. That's an interesting game. Downfall. That's the one that has the interesting concept where one person is the Soviets, one person is the Western Allies. You're converging on Europe from two different sides.
Yes.
And the Soviet player also plays the German pieces that confront
Oppose the West. Yes.
And the Western player plays the German pieces that confront the Soviets.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Fantastic concept. I had a look at. I saw the map because you guys have a demo going all weekend.
Yes.
It reminds me in some ways of some of the maps of Carl Paradis, the no retreat. The no retreat. Some of the palette is a bit the same there. I thought it looks gorgeous. Even in prototype, I think that's how far along was that game when John Butterfield has kind of picked up the last 10 yards on that one, right?
Yeah, I called him in. The game was done except for the combat system, and it was just this crazy thing. We had a system that we liked on paper, and then when we sat down and played it, it was super static, and we had just World War I. We were entrenched, and we were like, whoa. Yeah. So we went back to the drawing board, and we just made one small change. And then we sat down and played it again, and all of a sudden we've gone from Stalingrad to Berlin in 3 days. We just plowed through. We're like, okay, we pulled that lever too hard.
Right, yeah.
And it was just a tiny change.
Yeah.
So we went back and we're like, okay, what else can we change? So we'll go back to what we had here, and let's make one other different change and see how that affects things. So we were going just back and forth, and we were static to fluid, static to fluid. Drove us nuts. So we were still trying to figure out where that balance point was. But all the other systems were so meshed together. They're like gears within gears.
Right.
Stuff. So we didn't really want to change anything else as it was. And it's like something within that system just had to get fine-tuned. So that's where we were at. And it was after 10 or 12 years worth of playing with it.
Right.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So when I got to the point where I was like, I really need to get some of these games back out there and get them finished, I contacted John and told him, I was like, if you're willing to step in and help me out with this, what we need is a combat system. But in order to finish that up, if you need to change other things, I am open to that because it's the only way we're getting this game out.
Right.
So he came up and worked with me on it, and we found out that Chad never wrote the rule book because it was all in his head.
Yes.
And the funny thing was, to me, this always cracked me up, for as well as he wrote rule books, he hated writing rule books.
Right.
So he always put it off to the tail end, so he only had to do it one time and then walk away from it.
Right. Yeah, right.
So it was all still in his head. So the way he designs games, though, is that 2/3 of the rules actually end up on his player aids and his map.
Yes.
So we had that.
Right.
And then John and I had played with him several times. I mean, I played with him a billion times over the 10 years. But John had come to our house.
He was familiar with the game already.
Yeah, and he'd come over and he was familiar. So the two of us sat down and went, okay, how much do you remember of this? And so we were trying to work from memory. And the tricky part there was, one, I knew so many different iterations of the game over those years.
Of course,
so then I'm worried about
version this, version that.
What version do I remember?
Yeah.
And then when Chad passed, I was there in the moment and saw the light go out.
Yeah.
And he was on his feet at the time, and the impact that event had on me was the equivalent of getting smacked in the head with a 2x4. It made a physical change to the structure of my brain, and I lost a portion of my memory for about a year.
It's trauma, right?
It was essentially trauma, but it actually caused a physical change, which I didn't know was even possible. Apparently, it's a thing.
Our brains are connected to our bodies.
Crazy, I know.
Yeah.
So I had to go through this period of trying to get my head back together, and finding out, okay, how much do I trust myself now, having gone through that?
Seeing John, I just met him this weekend for the first time, but can't imagine there are many. I mean, he's a brilliant designer anyway. Period. That's you got the right guy for that.
Oh, yeah.
But you also, it seems to me, you also got the right guy in terms of he really seems like a gentle, sensitive man.
Oh, absolutely.
To go through this with you.
Yes. And he and Chad were great friends.
Right.
There was a bit of mutual hero worship, I think, going on with them.
Yeah.
It was cute. The first time they met, Chad had played Ambush.
Yeah.
And like all of John's stuff, like everybody.
Yeah, I'm not a solo gamer. That's the only solo game I like.
Chad, same thing. Yep. Pete always had somebody to play with. So, he was always about the social aspect.
Yeah,
but that was the one game that he would play solo.
Fantastic.
So he was super excited to meet John. And John came over to talk to him, I think, about Combat Commander. And how much, so the two of them were like fanboys of each other right from the get-go. And their personalities meshed so well. We went out to dinner a couple times, our families.
Right.
And just so easy to get along with. And easy to joke around with and to trade ideas. And they were both so open to sharing that information.
I never met your husband, but you can feel that openness in his designs. Like there's a real sort of spirit of anything goes here. Let's put it all on the table.
Yes.
So that sort of makes sense that those two, because that's what you get from John too, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah, and super sweet. And he was one of the guys who reached out, afterwards. Is like, whatever you need, I'm here. Whether you need it or not, just know. I got your back. So
a year or 2 years, no, it's 3 years now. But how long have you been working with John on Downfall then?
About a year and a half now, almost 2 years, I think.
So kind of like a year later or a year and a half later.
It took me a little while and then I was like, I've got to at least start getting this stuff back out there.
And you guys and now you've come up with a combat system that you feel is working.
Oh, he did. He did, yeah. Well, I just turned it over. He and I talked through everything we could remember, pulled together as much collectively, and we're like, okay, we think this is our framework, this is our starting point, and I was like, you go do whatever you need to do, and if you feel like you need to make big changes to anything, just reach out to me, and we're going to talk it through.
And did he have to make big changes?
No.
Yeah.
He's made some smaller changes to subsystems and things, and he would just contact me and says, I'm changing this, is that cool? And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
So I want the game done. I totally trust John and his design chops and his decisions at this point. And because he knew Chad and because he was familiar with the game, I totally trust whatever direction he feels it needs to go to get that final vision pulled together. Having
played it in its development when Chad was still alive must have made a big difference in giving him a frame of reference of where the game was, where Chad was trying to take the game in the first place.
And I wonder if that's the reason he was able to even step in.
Right.
And say, yes, I can carry this one across the line, because, without that experience, how would he have understood? But he and Chad, their conversations were at such a level. It was so amazing to be a fly on the wall.
Right.
Listening to the two of them talk design theory and the history and what they were trying to model and how they were doing it. And just the level of those conversations was just amazing to me.
I can only imagine. That game is close to being done, playtest, done development,
yes.
and ready to move into whatever.
We're pretty much waiting for art.
Art, yes.
At this point.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So that probably means it's still like a year away from getting in the production pipeline, or half a year away, or
probably half a year away at least.
Half a year away, yeah.
Just given the bottleneck in art.
Yeah. So we'll maybe look for that to be released maybe next summer.
Yeah,
I
would think so. I did the layout for the rules. So they're done except for plugging in final art. So I've got playtest art holding the spots for the examples and the, what the units look like and all that stuff. So we've got placeholders in there. And so once final art gets done, it's just a matter of pull that out and put the new piece in.
Right.
And so that final step is going to go really quickly once final art. But the art department's had their hands on it. Like Mark Simonich did the map.
Yeah.
Chad had done the counters.
Right. So tons of it is already done.
So a lot of that is already there.
Yeah. And you've now done the layout.
And I've now done the rules layout.
Yeah. The rules layout is huge.
I don't know. I've been doing it for a while. I've done Wolfpack for Mike Berticelli. I just did one of the Commands and Colors rule books and stuff. And I don't know if it's just because I write so much to begin with, but for me, processing all those words and getting everything pulled together into the right order and the right look and stuff it's a very natural thing.
It's a
It
blessing
took me,
you have that skill.
It only took me a couple of days. When John sent me the text, it was just a
Right.
couple of days, and I turned it back around for the first draft.
It just needs. There's something about a well laid out rule book has enough white space that your eye relaxes a bit. If there's too much text, you struggle to keep your place in.
Yep.
Like there's just all of that, and not all rule books have that attention to detail. I guess it might add a few more pages to the book too to give it that white space, but it's 100% worth it.
It's necessary.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we just get tired. You might not know why you're struggling with rules. Well, it could be just the way they're laid out.
I can't tell you how many rule books I've fallen asleep on.
Yeah.
I take them to bed. If I feel like I'm not going to sleep well tonight, I'll take a rule book to bed. Knocks me out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honest to goodness.
Before you started developing with Chad, you played war games with Chad though. You're like
yes.
you said to me you're a World War II gamer. You're like that's your thing.
Yeah.
So working on this latest iteration of the fighting formations is like right in your wheelhouse.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I took an interest in World War II just from a historical perspective back in elementary school.
Right.
My dad is a big history buff and was a teacher for a while. And both my parents and all my grandparents were teachers. And so I grew up with history as a living thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what caused it in the first place, but I focused in on World War II Europe and just devoured everything I could ever get my hands on. And I got into Euro board gaming, miniatures, battle, that whole side of things, and didn't know wargaming even existed. And when my play group and Chad's play group crossed over one year, he introduced me to ASL Stalingrad.
Oh, yeah. Red
And
Barricades.
I was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole world out there I need to get familiar with. And so when we started dating, he had Totaler Krieg.
Yeah.
And he says, would you be willing to take a shot at this? He says, I bought the game. I can't get anyone else to play with me. Would you like to try this? So that was my first war game.
That's diving in the deeper end.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't know that at the time,
Yeah.
so I'm like, okay, I'll read the rule book. We'll see what I can make out of it. And the two of us just
as long as you got somebody to teach you, though, anything's accomplishable.
Well, he hadn't played it either.
Oh yeah. Well,
So
there
we
you
just
go.
sat and fumbled our way through it the first time, and I was sold. So I play at both ends of the spectrum and nothing in the middle. So I do tactical, grand strategic, and I have zero chops when it comes to operational stuff.
It's funny you say that because way back in the day, my first few games were tactical. It was like Tobruk, Richthofen's War, and Panzer Leader, and then Third Reich. So it was exactly the same thing. And I kept buying tactical games and grand strategic games, and I avoided the operational for years and years as well. My mind didn't work that way for the longest time. Or
so
even
I got
battle
into
games, just like
ASL, and I tried John Prado's Third Reich. My brain did not gel with that game, but that was the scale, that I was looking for. And we just kept going back to TK.
Yeah.
Over and over, and I don't know how many times we have played that game over the 19 years.
I'm looking forward to the republishing that game. Apparently, and it's going to kind of come out at the two of them in one big box.
Oh, the Axis Empires, version. Yeah, I got both of them when they first came out. TK2, we played the heck out of. We tried Daisenso 2 or 3 times, and the funny thing was, my Pacific knowledge is for beans.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Chad was the same way. We had both taken such a focus on the European theater that we're like, okay, I know the names of the islands that we went to. I don't know what order we went to them in.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get my supply in order in the right direction to get everything flowing the way it's supposed to end up with the end of war result that we're supposed to get.
Well, I wonder too, since you have had a go at both of those, I've also heard that the system works better for the land war in Europe and Africa than it does for the naval war in the East. That the Totaler Krieg game is more fulfilling, sort of, than the Daisenso game.
Well, from my point of view, yes, but I don't know how much of that is tainted by my lack of knowledge in that other area. So I don't know if it's simply because I'm more comfortable with, I know the order of events, I know the locations, my geography's solid, I know, the major players on both sides, and I know how things are supposed to play out if we're going historic.
Right.
We love to do the pre-war for TK and do all the what if.
Yep.
geopolitics type stuff, and then just see, okay, what happens by 39? Where do we actually jump off if we do this? And see how did that change things.
Right.
So we'd love to mess around with that stuff.
If Spain goes a whole different way, what does that change? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Or people go, Italy is just a non-entity. It's not even gonna
do anything.
Yeah,
right.
and just see how that shakes things up. So we used to love to mess around with that, and then you go off the rails within a couple of turns. You're like, oh, okay, that experiment did not happen. So we would just reset back to like 1940, and just start from the scenario start and go. But yeah.
And besides, obviously you've played tons of Combat Commander and Fighting Formations. Do you have other tactical systems that you play that you're interested in?
Not at the moment, but I do want to learn the last 100 yards.
Yeah, I just learned that one this
I
year.
heard nothing but good stuff about it, and the few times that I've watched other people play, and I'm like, this looks really easy to drop into and fun, and it looks like a system that I'd be able to solo, because my local wargaming group is kind of falling apart.
Right.
Between Chad passing at the end of 2019, COVID hitting at the beginning of 2020, we just all stopped getting together.
Right.
And there was a little time period there where it was after he passed, but before we went into lockdown the first time, where the guys just all felt so awkward coming over. They didn't know what to do with me, how to talk to me, what not to say, that kind of thing. So they just kind of avoided me.
Right.
And then COVID hit, and that just kind of reinforced that separation.
Yeah.
And now they're not even playing war games anymore. They're all just off doing Euros and doing family stuff.
You're going to have to teach them again.
So I'm going to have to find another group.
Right, yeah.
And so now I'm looking into solo gaming.
Right.
So I picked up a couple of solo games here.
Yeah.
This weekend, and I've had a couple friends either send me stuff or recommend stuff that I've picked up for different eras, because I'm like, okay, if I'm solo gaming, I don't feel as locked in now by my own personal restrictions, because it used to get reinforced. Like, I was World War II centric, and so was Chad. So everything I was looking at, I was like, if it wasn't World War II, I'm like, okay, if I'm even marginally interested, can I get him interested? And so if I picked something that was a little out there and he kind of went the other way, we didn't pick it up.
Right.
We didn't play it. So now it's just me, and it's a solo game. So it's like, okay, I can pick it up, I can goof around with it, and I either like it or I sell it.
Yeah.
But I'm not impacting anybody else's playtime.
And if you find you like it, if you're like most war games, you mess around a little bit with another period, next thing you know, you're watching a video about that history, or you're getting a history book off.
Actually, I do it the other way around, because the things I was thinking about getting, I dove into the history first.
Right. Yeah.
So,
they're like
Yeah. So I called up a friend of mine, and I'm like, okay, if I want to get into Roman era combat and go in through one of those systems, where do I start for podcasts? Who's got the good information, the good voice to listen to?
Mm-hmm.
What's your number one? This was my favorite production. And so I had a couple of recommendations, and I picked one, and I started listening through, and then I started going on YouTube and finding the guys who were putting out the maps and showing you how things were developing.
I did
that first.
I remember a podcast about guys who specifically talked about ancient combat. That was their whole. That was the whole podcast, and then Mike Duncan's History of Rome for just the big picture of the history. There's some good podcasts out there on.
Yeah. So I've got
Roman
a list
stuff.
of, I think, 16 different podcasts of very specific topics.
Right.
That I've dug up, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to work my way through them.
Right.
So I did the.
And what game did you? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, White Dogs, Caesar Solitaire.
Right.
So I got that.
Yeah.
And then for my second solitaire game, I picked up Joel Toppin's Navajo Wars.
Yeah.
Which I absolutely love. So I played that several times.
Another nice fellow.
Oh yeah, great friend, nice guy. I haven't actually played the Caesar Solitaire yet. Yeah. I started digging into the history, and the game hasn't hit my table, but Navajo Wars has a couple of times.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, after I played it the first time, I was like, okay, this is great. So it's obviously going to hit the table again. But this weekend, the solo stuff I picked up was World War II centric for, I was like, okay, if I'm going to get in and start learning a bot and how the bots all work and that kind of thing, I figured I'd start with something that was already a comfort zone.
Yeah.
So it's like World War II, okay, so I know the basic framework. Now I want to see how the bot works the system.
Yeah.
So
there's been a real explosion in solo gaming, sort of, I think, spurred on by the whole COVID.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like the solo bots that Stuka Joe that they're putting out, that GMT's putting out. Everybody's just using them on any. They're using them wherever they can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think was really great. If you're going to be locked down because of plague, why not game?
Why not game?
What else you can do?
To get back to what you're working on with the Fighting Formations game, even though that game has a small amount of cards, I found that game really fun to just play both sides solo. Like
yes.
I mean, when I played I haven't played the 29th Division yet one, but the original.
But the Gross Deutschland. Yeah.
It plays great solo.
Yes.
And it's such an innovative system.
I love that system.
That whole matrix thing is just the orders matrix.
That's
and
how
the
that game was born. I wish I could have videotaped the first day. I wish I'd known back then that this was going to be like a cool thing. But I got home from work because I had the day job that paid the bills.
Right. Yeah.
Chad did game design full time, and I got home from work one day and he's got a little sketch of just that grid. And there's no orders or anything on the sides of it.
Right.
It was just blank spaces of orders will go here.
Yeah.
And it was just this little row of numbers, and he says, cubes are going here, and the orders are going to be different on each side, and I've got this engine, and I need to flesh it out. But this is the basis. This is the heartbeat of the game.
Yeah.
And everything else is going to come around this. And I looked at it, and I was like, I think I get it, but I don't think I get it. I need to see it work. So I got home the next day, and he'd already done all the graphics on the computer, printed them up, set it down, put the cubes in place, assigned just random orders at that point. And so I came home, and it's on the table with the cubes.
And the initiative track
and the
underneath
track.
with that goes different.
And so he's
ways.
like, okay, so this is how it works. And he pulls a cube and sets it aside. He pays the cost, and he's talking me through. And I'm like, oh my God, I get this.
Yeah.
He said, that was quick and easy. I totally understand the heart of the game that fast. I said, so how do we translate? And he says, so this little thing that says order, he says, think of that as like this one's a move. And the one directly opposite on the other side for the other guy is a fire.
Yeah.
Because, they're not the same.
That same. Yeah.
So I was like, oh my God. I said, so every card in Combat Commander that has an order on it, he says, yes, is the Matrix. And I was like, wow, so where do we get like all the bells and whistles and the events and the fun chaosy stuff? And he says, that's going to be card decks, and it's going to be end of turn effects, and it's going to be optional because some people don't like that. So he was listening to the feedback all the time and trying to always incorporate what he was learning into his next design. So so that whole thing pulled together so quickly from he just had this mental image of that grid, that matrix. We didn't even know what to call it the first time. He called it a matrix. I think it was right after the movie came out.
But that is the heartbeat of the game. Like
absolutely,
the actual movement combat is it's great. It's
bit.
fine.
Yeah.
But it's like most other tactical games in a way. But that order system and the matrix and the way it shifts the initiative is what gives that game all the flavor.
That's where the tension comes in. Is that push pull?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a game yesterday. I was playing with NB. And we had a game, it went right down to the very last, like 2-3 actions in the very last turn, fighting over that one central objective that if either one of us had taken it, that was a win.
That's the win, yeah.
And we ended up in melee. And
so
just like
wins.
right down literally to a fist fight in the building, just duking it out over this whole thing. And it became a combination of the movie that we were watching develop, in the theater with that little house with everybody crammed in there duking it out, and the push-pull tension on the Matrix. And I had one mission command still available. And it came to the point where it's like, if I do one more thing as the board exists right now with tactical command going, I was going to have to pay initiative to push it back to his side.
Right.
And give him a chance to do something about it. And we've only got a couple of very expensive orders left on the board, so it's getting really swingy at this point. And I didn't want to give him the opportunity for anything that big. And I was like, I'm looking at the board, and I'm like, we're down to the last turn. What I do with command now does not matter. And so I'm like, 0. Mission command is in. Everything's free. We are now plowing forward, and I got the next order. And was able to, but the melee, bad die rolls.
No, that's the way she goes.
Blood was shed, mistakes were made, lessons were learned, and NB walked off with the win. But it took all the way down to the last die roll.
It's a fantastic system, and I for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why it didn't get more traction when it was released. I know some players didn't like how big the scenarios were.
Yes.
But then, the Kharkov expansion addressed that. There was lots of nice shorter scenarios.
All the work that Brian did, was in response to.
All, people should be playing that game. So when it wasn't sort of, it didn't seem to be getting the traction it should. I thought, oh, here's a system I really like, and it's going to just sort of fade away.
Yeah. So what happened was
I was so happy to hear that it's coming back.
We were, as soon as it came out, before Brian even did his expansion, that Chad worked with him on that. So I wasn't even involved in that pack. So it was like Brian was doing the design work. Chad was teaching him design at the time and kind of did his development.
Right.
So I was working on other projects. But we had wanted to go highlight another unit.
Yeah.
And so we were looking at American units. We're pulling stuff out and just going, okay, I want to do this unit. And then we tried to find the research to get us down to the level of granularity. We need stuff at the platoon level. And we could get down to like company. And then it just, we hit a brick wall.
Yeah.
So like, okay, fine, pick a different formation. Let's start doing some research. Let's see how much we can find on these guys. And we would get down to that same level and not beyond. And you can't find the records the way we could with the Germans, kept just amazing records, and people wrote books about it.
But so did you end up with Joe Balkowski?
Yes. So we were whining to friends.
He's crazy about the 29s, right?
So we were whining to friends, because we do. And some of our friends on the East Coast are friends with Joe and knew of his work. And so somehow, I think Joe sent Chad one of his books, and he says, is this the level of stuff that you need? And we both just ripped through the book. And we were like, yes, this is it. So we bought all the rest of the series and just dove in.
How crazy that it's another like game designer / historian who kind of saved your
it's like
bacon
his life's work.
Yeah,
I mean, he's so detailed, and the amazing stuff that he wrote and the level that it came from, because his was actually even below platoon level.
And isn't
he
like a historian for that unit's
division. Absolutely.
museum or whatever?
Yeah, and I would love to get to I'm planning a trip to the East Coast for next year.
Yeah.
I would love to go to the museum, to meet him, to thank him for sending Chad the book.
Well, and he's got some great designs in the history of wargaming as well.
Oh, yeah, that's a legend.
Yeah. So.
But I owe him such a debt of gratitude.
Yeah.
For sending us that material.
So that one's closer to being released, yes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's on P500. The rulebook is done. That was done before Chad got sick. Playbook was 95% done because my historic notes. I'm doing a write-up for a unit history, much condensed, not Joel's four books. But it goes from June 8th, because neither one of us had the guts to do D-Day. So we pick it up just after the beach landing. And it gives the history of the unit, and then as the scenarios take place, it says, okay, at this point, you will see scenario 1 here, and this is the action, and it continues with the unit history. And so it's going to go from there all the way through France, where they got sent to Holland, Aachen, Germany.
Right.
And so, I got maybe halfway through writing that series of notes and inserting where the scenarios went, and that's when Chad got sick, and everything went on a back burner. Well, that's been 3 years since I started writing that.
Right.
I have to pick up the thread. I have to pick up the narrative with the same tone and remember all the events and get it all written down. Well, I haven't read the books in 3 years.
Right.
I don't remember the unit history with the detail that I was writing at that point. So now I'm rereading the books.
Right.
So I'm starting over.
Starting over again.
So so I've got to get my act together and get that done. But everything else for the playbook and the rule book is done.
It's done. So
the scenario book, we had 2 scenarios left to finish, which Chad and I had started. John and I are finishing.
Right.
He was able to step in and pick up the thread of where we were at with those. So between he and I, we were finishing those. And he had already done his sketches for the maps. He had found the locations for us.
Right.
And we're using like real world maps.
Yeah.
So he'd done the sketches. So I sat down on the computer and I used Chad's same software, all of his settings, and was able to recreate the maps. And when I went to the expo, I took the maps, some of mine, some of Chad's, and people can't tell the difference.
Perfect.
Yeah, because I've got all of his stuff.
So
I just go, okay, what's his setting for a forest?
Right.
And I just
There it
use
is.
it, and you can't tell the difference.
So those are the first 2 games that will come out, but you alluded to the fact that you have a sort of a filing cabinet of things that he had been working on, and there might be more posthumous releases.
Yes. Yeah, everything that I am capable of finishing. And if there's stuff that's marginal that I actually need a designer's brain, I'm going to tap into I've got a bazillion designer friends now.
Yeah.
So if I've got a game that I can't finish on my own without some assistance, I can kind of pick and choose of who do I think is really suited to this particular game,
Right.
and get some help.
Yeah.
And see how many of these I can actually finish up and get out there.
And you'd said that Chad was, so World War II focused. Are all the designs different things
No,
about World War II?
Absolutely
It's all
not.
over the place?
It's all over the place.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, we've got fantasy stuff. We've got just family Euro stuff. I mean, urban sprawl, dominant species kind of things.
Right, yeah.
There were other projects that he was working on that are in that vein. And then the military stuff was all tactical level.
Yeah.
So I've got a variety of projects that were in a variety of stages, because how he worked was he always had 3, 4, 6 projects going in his head. There was always one he was primarily focused on, but if he hit a roadblock and he needed to just step away from it, he would set that one aside and he would go back through his filing cabinet and grab the notebook that belonged to another project. And he would bring that notebook out and continue working on it. And when he got an inspiration for the primary game, he would simply put that notebook back in the file cabinet.
Right. So that whenever he got a little bit of a block, he could keep moving forward on something.
Something.
Right.
Yeah. And some days for him, the way his brain worked, it was just a matter of us going for a walk.
Right. Yeah.
And he would spend the entire walk talking his way through. And that's where I basically functioned as his sounding board. And he would just keep throwing ideas out. I would question things as they occurred to me. Or if he got into a concept where I got lost and I'm like, no, I need more detail. Explain to me more about what it was. And so him just talking it through out loud solidified a lot of it in his own head. And then we would go home and keep working.
I'm sure that any places where you had a question, that would make him realize he wasn't clear enough at that.
Yes.
Yeah. That was like a clue.
Yeah. Well, and some of it was, especially in the early days, was my not being familiar with the genre or the terms,
Right, the terms,
or tactics in the way that he was. And so I would have to question, why do you do this or why? And he's like, well, I'm setting up a mousetrap. So I'm looking to fall back in the center and have both wings envelop as the enemy pushes forward.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, it's called mousetrapping, and here's what it looks like. And so I'd be like, oh, now I get it.
You get a little lesson in military tactics and history.
Yeah, but I'd be like, why would you deliberately build a weak center? And he's like, well, here's why. So it's just me learning along with that process. But so the more familiar I got with his style and the tactics and the history and how production-wise we pulled all these things together, I think the better sounding board I was able to provide for him. But such a huge part of his process was just all in his head.
Right, yeah.
And then he saw his design visually. So he was very graphic-oriented right from the get-go. So he would sit down and immediately start laying out his units, pulling together his maps, putting up the matrix, or whatever it was, had to be visually displayed for him in order for him to continue working on it.
Right.
And that's why when his stuff was done, he had done the rule book and the graphics and the counters and everything was finished.
And that's why so much of the game is on the counters and on the play aids and on the maps.
Because that was his process.
That's his process. It's right there.
Yeah.
Well, it's so exciting to know that we're going to still get a few more gems.
As many as I can finish.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's been great talking to you, Kai. This has been wonderful.
This was fun.
I'm so happy to hear all this, and I'm congratulations on your new job with GMT.
Oh, thank you.
This has been a wonderful event. I'm excited to be here.
This is loads of fun.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed speaking with Kai. This episode, no surprise that the bouquets this episode go to the whole GMT staff for putting on such a homey, welcoming event. I felt like I was at a high school reunion for a school I didn't even come from, but I was being treated like I was one of the old gang or something. Very, very friendly, very family feeling. Trash talking in the best possible spirit, and no testosterone competitiveness on display at all. 10 out of 10 would recommend for sure. And then finally, parting shots. Well, no real editorial this episode, as I'm still filled with the good feels after meeting so many new people at GMT West. I don't really have an axe to grind this weekend or this at this moment. Anyway, at least not for now. But if you do, please drop by the website. Let me know what's on your mind. or vote in a poll, or leave a comment, or register, have your say in our forums. I'd love to hear from you, what you think of the podcast, what you think of the website, what you think of YouTube, or even more interestingly, just what's on your mind about wargaming in the hobby. You can hit me up at pushingcardboard.com or at cardboardpusher on Twitter, or even email me at grant@pushingcardboard.com. We also have a Discord server. You can find a link to that on our website, or probably through Discord search, if that's your thing. So thanks for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the interview in particular. If you did enjoy it, please tell a friend. And if you have time, leave a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. In the meantime, have fun wargaming, and I'll talk to you next time.